Hello, today we're going to look at the best settings for shooting video with the Nikon D3400. Hello and welcome to the Camerawize channel. Today we're going to be looking at the best settings for shooting video with the Nikon D3400. This is an entry-level DSLR camera designed by Nikon for people who are moving up perhaps from bridge cameras or from compact cameras. And whilst it shoots excellent stills, it also shoots superb video. One of the selling points for this camera is it shoots full HD video, which is 1080, at 60 frames per second, which is really very impressive and gives you a very smooth and very high quality video reproduction. One of the downsides, however, is that it doesn't have an external microphone socket, and that's very much in common with most cameras in this category, though ironically its predecessor, the Nikon D3300, does have an external microphone socket. And I would say that if you're going to shoot a lot of video, which will require a lot of sound when you're actually recording the video, perhaps you're doing interviews or you're recording bands, then you might want to look at the D3300 rather than this camera. On the other hand, one of the things that I really do like about this camera is that it has a lot of effects and modes so that you can be quite creative with the way that you shoot stills. And those effects are translated through to videos too, which is really quite fun. So you can have a lot of fun with photo illustration, which shoots a sort of comic effect, but in video. You can have fun with the miniature effect, which shoots a sort of time lapse, but within the miniature effect option. And you can also have some great fun, which I found, with toy camera, which gives a really oldie-worldy type of shot through video with vignetting and quite unsaturated colour. So before you shoot video, you need to change some of the settings in the menus. So first of all, switch the camera on and press the menu button, and you're looking for the shooting menu. Now the video options are right at the bottom of the page, so you could use the multi-selector to go all the way down, or you can press it one up, and because it's on a rotating dial, it means that you go straight to movie settings. If you select that, then you can first of all choose your frame rate and frame size. There are two different frame rates. One is NTSC, which is mainly for America, and that will give you 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second. And the other is PAL, which is mainly for Europe, which will give you 50 frames per second and 25 frames per second. It's quite important that you choose the correct one for your country, so it's worth checking to see if you're not sure. The easiest thing is to look on Google, really. Now, as I said, because it will shoot full 1080 HD, I would recommend that, obviously. It will go down to 720, which is perfectly acceptable for social media, for YouTube, etc. And it will give you a slightly different length of time for recording, but we'll look at that later. If you move one down, you can have a look at movie quality, which of course should be high rather than normal, and then down one more to microphone. Now, as I've said, this doesn't have an external microphone socket, but it does have a microphone, an internal microphone here, which can be reasonably effective over short distances. You have three options for microphone. The first one is auto, which is okay and works reasonably well for ambient sound. The second one is manual, which I would recommend because it gives you more control over the sound that you're recording. And if you're in manual, you should be aiming for your sound to peak at 12. So if you can test out the recording beforehand, if somebody's talking, for example, then what you're really looking for is that person at their loudest to peak on 12, and you can use the multi-selector to move the sensitivity up or down to ensure that that happens. The final one is to switch microphone off, and I don't recommend that at all, even if you don't intend using the sound. Having the sound on the video is actually a very useful way of selecting clips when you're editing. So I would have that on even if you are not in fact going to use the sound. Coming out of that, you then go on to wind noise reduction, which sometimes is useful, but not terribly. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference. And then finally, manual movie settings. Now, if you leave that off, even if you go into manual on here, you won't be on manual settings because you've switched it off here. If you switch it on here, you can use the manual settings and the auto settings. So I would recommend that you switch that on. If you want to know more about this camera, then why don't you download our superb guide to the Nikon D3400? It tells you everything you need to know about this camera and also about the other cameras available at the moment. It's downloadable from here or from the description below, and it's absolutely free. So once you've changed the menu settings, you can start looking through the camera to see what you're actually seeing when you want to shoot a video. And in order to do that, you have to press the Live View button at the back. Now, there are two quite important buttons here for when you're in Live View. And one is the Info button on the top, and the other is the I button, which is down on the bottom left-hand corner next to the screen. And these serve very useful purposes. So when you switch initially to Live View, you will see a lot of information going along the top of the screen. Now, because you've switched onto Live View now, this isn't yet onto video mode, and so a lot of the information is in fact for stills. So, for example, you will have whether it's on what mode it's in, whether it's on auto or manual or aperture priority. You'll have something referring to whether the flash will come on or not. You'll have the shutter, single shutter or continuous shutter. You'll have the autofocus settings. You'll have the picture control setting, the white balance, and whether the stills are going to be large and fine JPEGs, etc. If you press the Info button at the top once, then you will now be in video mode. And that tells you less information, but more relevant information about what you've actually got as settings for video, which will give you the frame rate and frame speed. It will give you the autofocus settings. It will give you the picture control and the white balance. And at the bottom, it will also give you the microphone levels. Now, obviously, they are far more important and relevant to you now than they would be if you were shooting stills. So that's why they're there. Now, if you're in this mode and you press I, that gives you all the things that you can change when you're in this mode. So, for example, here, because I'm on auto, it allows me to change the frame size and quality, the microphone settings, the wind noise reduction, whether it's on or off, and the focus mode. Now, if I switch this round quickly onto M and go into that setting, then it will give me much more. It will give me again the movie frame size and quality. It will give me the white balance, which I can change. It will give me the microphone. It will give me the ISO, which again I can change. It will tell me that I'm in a certain picture control. It will tell me that the wind noise reduction is on or off. It will give me the autofocus area mode control and the focus mode. So that's one really useful way of seeing what's available to you when you're shooting video. So if we press the I mode again to come out of that and then press the Info button again, then we get rid of all that information so that the screen is fairly bare, but we do get the markers showing the extent of the video. Now, when you're shooting video, you will notice that you don't get the entire full screen that you would when you're shooting stills. And that is because the area of the sensor being used to shoot video is in fact smaller. And so you get a smaller area on the screen that actually is included within the video range. That will change slightly if you're shooting 60, 30, or if you're shooting 720. So it's worth keeping an eye on. And if you press the Info button one more time, then you get the grid so that you can keep everything level. But the I button is very useful for when you're in the shooting mode on the Info button, because it gives you all the options that you can change and look at when you're shooting the video. In many ways, the settings for shooting stills or videos on a DSLR are the same. For example, you can use the dial mode here to select the mode in which you want to shoot either stills or video. You can have it on auto, you can have it on portrait, or you could have it on manual. And the parameters are effectively the same too. You can change your ISO, you can change your aperture, or you can change your shutter speed. The only extra element when you're shooting video is your frame rate, and that's selected as we have done before when you chose 1080-60 or 1080-25 or 30 or 720. So the frame rate is the one element, the extra element for video. Now, if you're shooting at a given frame rate, it's recommended that your shutter speed is twice that frame rate. So if you're shooting at 30 frames per second, the shutter speed should be about 1/60th. Likewise, if you're shooting at 60, then your frame rate should be about 1/25th. Now, you do have some flexibility here. It's not carved in stone. You could easily go up to 1/200th or even 1/400th if that's what you wanted, without the video suffering too much. In terms of ISO, then obviously in terms of keeping the quality as good as possible, then you'd like the ISO to be as low as possible. And the aperture, of course, will control your depth of field. Now, the three elements here, ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, can all be changed when you're in the manual setting. And let me show you how. Now, the odd one out, in a sense, is aperture, because you cannot change the aperture when you're actually shooting the video. So you need to preset your aperture, and you can only do that outside of live view. And if you're outside of live view, then you can see the aperture when you're in the back screen, and you can change that by pressing the exposure button at the top and using the main dial to go along to change the aperture either up or down. Now, at this point, of course, you can also change the ISO and the shutter speed. In exactly the same way, you can change the shutter speed by using the main dial on its own, and you can change the ISO by looking at the I button and moving across and choosing the ISO and changing it accordingly. However, you may want to change either the ISO or the shutter speed whilst you are actually shooting the video. In which case, you can either use the function button, which you've preset to change ISO, and use the main dial, which will change the ISO even if you're shooting at the same time, or you can use the main dial on its own to change the shutter speed, again, even if you're shooting video at the time. And the great thing about using the back screen, of course, is that you can instantly see the change in either changing shutter speed or ISO. The image will go lighter or darker. So those are the ways that you can change the shutter speed, the aperture, or the ISO when you're shooting video. Now, just as with stills, you can set your picture control as well. And that can really be quite important. When you're shooting stills, you can set it to be mono or vivid or bright, and that can affect the exposure of your pictures. But when you're shooting video, it's recommended to shoot as flat as possible and not to have it too vivid. And the reason for that is it's easier in post-production to add saturation than it is to take it out. And very usefully, this camera has a very specific picture control for shooting video. So if you go into menu, you will see, if you're in shooting menu, a little way down just below white balance is set picture control. Now, as I say, you've got standard and neutral and vivid, etc. here, but right at the bottom, you've got flat. And flat is designed for shooting video. And that enables you to shoot with a very little contrast and ideally also very little saturation. And it also reduces the sharpness of the video, which is very useful. And so that is the one that I would recommend for shooting video, at least initially, until you decide that you want a specialized video, perhaps as shooting vivid or even shooting monochrome. But that's the picture control I would recommend right from the start.